DGMI the amazing truth about non-monogamy and the Bible.
So I do research about marriage and the Christian view, and I've been putting together stuff for some videos about it, and I found an interesting one. So whenever you talk to the Christians about their view of monogamy, they go, well, Adam and Eve were just together, and they were just had each other, and they had children, and that's their story, is basically Genesis, which almost everybody who knows takes that figuratively, which means it's not really factually put together. There are reasons to believe that I can go through some other time, but as a former minister, I can tell you that they're not. It's not meant to be taken word for word, literally. So then I say, what about the stories that the Genesis accounts come from? And people are dumbfounded. Christians are dumbfounded. They think, no. They came from the Bible. They came from the Jews or whatever. But no, they actually came from previous cultures. One of the cultures, it's funny. So the myths come from their Mesopotamian cultures, their Canaanite cultures. So they took the stories from them as how humans started, and those have an age to them. The Mesopotamian one is it's written in claim forms and stuff, and it's 12th century BCE. So that's 3,500 years ago, give or take a little bit. And that's a very interesting story. Another creation myth is the Greeks, and that's about 3,000 years ago. No, that'd be 5,000 years ago. It's about 3,000 BCE. And then so those have similarities to them. They also almost all have the flood story and some others. There's the Epic of Gilgamesh. People hear about that. And that was about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, give or take a little. And then there's another one that is really kind of interesting, and is recorded by the Aborigines today in Australia, the culture that was there. Now that's believed to be 60,000 years old, 60,000 years ago. And when you read the story, it's extremely similar to Genesis, and that has significance in their culture and their belief systems. But it's really interesting how close it is to Genesis. That an outside force came and created everything on Earth and how. So I was just going to say that the story of Adam and Eve is not considered to be literal by anybody who's has any idea, and it's also considered to come from other cultures. Now, that being said, what that means to monogamy is those cultures weren't monogamous, and I've said this before, that Jesus lived in a time in which people were polygamous. They were polygamous, and the males were not considered to be monogamous. So he lived in a time in which he could have said something in the scriptures like, wow, we should all be monogamous, but he didn't say that. He said it's the way it should have been with Adam and Eve. But he never said, and then he said because of their hard-heartedness, they allowed divorce. Well, not really the men, but they had their own rules for divorce. So that's kind of a standard step up from the cultures around them, which I found was really a lot about the Jewish faith, is that they had a lot of cultural steps up. And I like that. But I thought I would say, Jesus didn't condemn. They condemned adultery. They did, the early fathers, but they weren't monogamous. The culture wasn't monogamous. The early Christians were not monogamous. And they were constantly talking about, you shouldn't do this, but we know it happens. And that's when you read those scriptures with that in mind, that they were not themselves monogamous. They were kicked out of the church for the extremes. They were kicked out of the church. That's another thing. You shouldn't be kicked out of the church for non-monogamy. The founding fathers of Christianity kicked people out for extreme measures of immorality, one man sleeping with his mother, that kind of thing. And so just to set the matter straight, Christians really have no foundation about monogamy in the Bible. They weren't, and they should think about that when they're considering their own life and their own choices. And remember, they're your choices, but there's just a quickie on the monogamous front. Just a kind of a part B to what I just said about monogamy in the Bible. So you read the scriptures, and it's talking about it in Genesis 1, 27, 28, and then Jesus is quoted in Matthew 19, and it says, so they should leave their fathers and their mothers and join to his wife, and they become one flesh. And so they take that as monogamy. That's not a statement of monogamy. That's a statement of unity, and divorce, of course, breaks up that unity. Kind of a misrepresentation of the concept. Let no other man separate. Well, they do when they get divorced, and so It's amazing how many Christians get divorced, don't think about it. But they're monogamous when they're married. They're serial monogamy is what it's called. And people like David had 1,000 or more wives. There's almost all the people. Abraham was poly monogamy. He had many wives. And he had a slave girl, and they had children by them all. Rachel, Leah, some others for Jacob. Many one saw that he's been seen as going to a prostitute. So just a little bit of a video on that, and so if you don't take the creation myth as literal, Jesus obviously did, or he didn't, I don't know, because he was talking to a non-monogamous crowd. He was talking to a polygamous crowd. So I don't know if he did, but he's saying that's the way it should be. And ideally, maybe that's the way it should be. I guess you look also at the average lifespans too. Average lifespan of being 40 years. They married young. They stayed married to their short lives. I'm not sure that being in a longer life also doesn't say that we should really think about monogamous being a non-viable relationship. Very few people stay monogamous their whole lives. They think they are, they say they are, but in reality we know that they are not. So